Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with MicroMycel, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and MicroMycel technology.
With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MySight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you. Do your patients know what presbyopia is?
There are people who are afraid of the press.
Have you talked to your patients about multifocal contact lenses?
I've heard the bifocal, but not multifocal.
Exactly, not multifocal.
Do you need help with your multifocal strategy? Learn more at the conclusion of this episode. Hello, and welcome to the Open Your Eyes podcast. I'm Dr. Kerry Gill, the host of the documentary Open Your Eyes. Macular degeneration is the leading cause of blindness in the United States in people over the age of 55. There are 2 million people worldwide that are blind in both eyes from macular degeneration, and 270 people go blind each day from this blinding disease. Today, we're really very lucky to have our guest, Dr. Chris Knobbe. He's an ophthalmologist, eye physician, and surgeon, and he's just given this topic a lot of thought. He left clinical practice about 5 years ago to pursue his passion to find a cure for this blinding disease. Dr. Knobbe and colleagues started the Cure AMD Foundation. He has written an amazing book called the Ancestral Dietary Strategy to Prevent and Treat AMD. I want to thank you for joining me today, Chris. It's really an honor to be with you.
My pleasure, Kerry. Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's an honor.
Well, I want to start with, if you could explain to our audience, what is macular degeneration?
Yeah, so the macula, first of all, is just the central retina. It's the central 10 degrees of the retina, or accounts for approximately the central 10 degrees of your vision. And in macular degeneration, I guess the name gives it away. It's a degenerative disease of that part of the eye, which would account for your central vision. And this leads to blurring of central vision, poor night vision, and eventually central blind areas. So in other words, people eventually may get to the point where they can't read, they can't see a stop sign, they can't see their grandchildren's faces, for example. And as you mentioned in the opening, a substantial number of people are even going blind from this disease. I just want to say that as of 2020, this year, it is estimated 196 million people in the world have macular degeneration, and that number is expected to grow to 288 million by 2040. And if you think about this, because of the fact that this disease would occur in the last maybe 20 years or so of your life, the people that have macular degeneration in 2020, most of them won't be alive in 2040. So that is a whole new group of people, that 288 million, that will develop macular degeneration in this next 20 to 30 years, essentially. And then one other statistic is the World Health Organization. I've updated my statistics since the book, but the World Health Organization reviewed that around 3.15 million people were blind in both eyes as of 2006. Now that's the latest data, 14 years ago, to my knowledge. And so I did the calculations on this, and this means that roughly, probably at least 340 people are going blind every day. In other words, they were already blind in one eye from macular degeneration, and then today they will lose vision in their opposite eye, making them bilaterally blind. 3.15 million in 2006. So I would guess there's probably between 4 to 5 million people in the world blind in both eyes from macular degeneration today.
That's an incredible statistic. Now, you gave up clinical practice as a passion to help prevent this disease. Tell us that story.
Right. So, very quickly, Carrie, the story begins with my own health problems, and in my case, it was and remains arthritis. And I actually started suffering with arthritis when I was probably about 34 years old. I was just out of ophthalmology residency, and I'll keep this part really brief, so I don't want to waste people's time. But I suffered with that rather, severely and progressively until I was 50 years old, which was 2011, and I actually went on a kind of a quasi paleo diet. I gave up grains and dairy for a little bit, actually in 10 days, and my arthritis was something like 80% better. And Carrie, I was in bad shape with my arthritis. I was just absolutely miserable. It was almost every joint in my body by that point. And anyway, this was so fantastically life-changing for me, because I'd seen all kinds of physicians, all of whom pretty much were my friends or colleagues, but none of them had ever suggested anything about diet for arthritis. It was always a drug or an injection. And anyway, a change in diet gave me 80% relief in 10 days. And today I'm about 90 to 95% better with my arthritis than where I was 10 or 9 years ago, I guess, by moving essentially to more of an ancestral diet. So this is what led me on this path. And I just wanted to learn everything I could about nutrition. And then in 2013, can I continue this real quick?
Sure.
Okay. So in 2013, what happened was I had spent a couple of years trying to understand nutrition and what's driving all of this disease. And actually Lauren Cordain's book opened my eyes immensely. The book was called The Paleo Answer. And anybody who knows about paleo knows that Lauren Cordain is sort of the modern founder. And I'm not a paleo guy today, but anyway, so I learned a lot from that. But a lot of things still didn't make sense to me until I came across the research of Weston A. Price. And Weston Price was a nutrition researcher who in the 1930s studied populations all around the globe on 5 continents, hundreds of tribes and villages, thousands and thousands of people, as they transitioned from native traditional diets to westernized diets. And what Price found was that as people began to westernize their diet, and what that meant was consuming man-made processed nutrient deficient foods. And Price defined those as refined flour, sugars, vegetable fats, which is vegetable oils, canned goods, sweets, and confectionery, essentially. And so as people supplanted and replaced their traditional foods with our modernized processed foods, they first developed dental decay and dental malocclusion and misalignment in the children, and the adults developed dental decay and abscesses, and then they began to develop degenerative diseases like arthritis, cancers, and infectious diseases and so on. So then, so Price died in 1948, but he published 2 books that, when I eventually read those in 2013, completely changed my life again. And so I went down this path, and it was late 2013 that once I understood that processed food is driving all of this, all of these westernized diseases, which would be heart disease, cancer, stroke, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity, Alzheimer's disease, autoimmune diseases, the list goes on. So 2013, in my mind, I questioned, could processed foods be driving macular degeneration? That was late 2013. And by February of 2015, I had done enough research that I was convinced that this hypothesis held water, that indeed processed foods are driving macular degeneration. But I knew in order to investigate this, I'd have to commit full time, or it would take me, I figured, 5 or 6 years to do what we accomplished in about 18 months. And so essentially what we did was we looked at processed food consumption versus macular degeneration prevalence in 25 nations. And in a nutshell, what I'll say, Carrie, is that the data strongly supports the hypothesis that as processed food consumption goes up, macular degeneration prevalence escalates dramatically. And so the way we did that was we looked at sugar and vegetable oils as proxy markers of processed foods. But the interesting thing is that sugar and vegetable oils alone will account for around almost 50% of the American diet as of 2009 or 10. Just those 2 things alone, because sugar is about 21% of the American diet today, and vegetable oils, from our own published data, is around 32.5% of US caloric consumption. So anyway, so we can get into some details about different countries if you want to, and because I think that's pretty interesting too. But I will just say that in a nutshell, this data strongly supports the hypothesis.
In the early 1900s, the late 1800s, there was almost no macular degeneration, no chronic disease. What specifically changed? You outlined 4 main food groups that have changed. And if you could go into each one of those in a little bit of detail, and why we had no macular degeneration, we basically had no cancer, cardiovascular disease, and now it's exploded.
Right. So, the first thing I thought, Carrie, it was that if my hypothesis that macular degeneration is driven by processed, nutrient deficient, toxic food consumption. I don't use that term toxic lightly. I can explain that in detail. But if these foods are also driving macular degeneration, then one thing had to be true. Macular degeneration once had to be rare, because we didn't have processed foods 150 years ago, essentially, and I can give you the details on that. I'll come back to that. So what I did was I figured that this had all been researched, that, the history of macular degeneration. And in fact, only one ophthalmologist had ever done any significant research on that. I think the supposition has been that macular degeneration prevalence, macular degeneration has always existed. The prevalence has always been high. And, that this is a disease of aging and, genetics. And all of those assumptions have proven erroneous. And again, I don't say that lightly either, but so I went back and began to investigate this, and macular degeneration was discoverable in 1851 because of the genius of Hermann von Helmholtz, who designed the ophthalmoscope. And so the use of the ophthalmoscope was widespread within a decade of his publishing his book. So in the 1850s and 60s, the ophthalmoscope was in use all around the world. But over, and I probably won't go into all those details, but it was 23 years before the first cases of macular degeneration were described by Jonathan Hutchinson in London in 1874. And 1895, for example, Otto Haupt reviewed 50,000 ophthalmic medical records, patients with ophthalmic medical records, and determined that macular degeneration was as rare as traumatic maculopathy and myopic maculopathy. And you and I both know those are extremely rare disorders. You know, the typical textbooks from 1851 to 1930 either did not mention macular degeneration or would give it essentially one sentence. And yet we know that by 1975, the Framingham study showed that macular degeneration affected 8.8% of Americans over age 52 and 27.9% of patients over the age of 75, I believe it was. So almost a third of people over the age of 75 by 1990. So that was 4.5 million people. But if you looked back to 1920, or let me just say this, between 1851 and 1930, there was no more than about 50 cases of macular degeneration in all the world's literature. And so we know that that 80-year period, the disease was just extraordinarily rare. And yet, you know, today, 2020, there's 196 million people affected in the world. So, okay, so here's what happened. All right, 4 processed foods: sugar, refined white wheat flour, vegetable oils, and trans fats. This is exactly what Weston Price essentially showed us in 1939 and 1945 was driving all of this westernized disease in populations all around the world as they transitioned into you know, westernized food consumption. So sugar between 1822 and 1999 increased 17-fold. Sugar is a nutrient deficient processed food. All right. Second, vegetable oils. The first vegetable oil in the United States was cottonseed oil, and it was introduced right after the American Civil War in 1866. Essentially, most of the world, probably 99.8 or 9% of the world, had never consumed a polyunsaturated vegetable oil in their life. And certainly we had none in the United States and none in the UK. Anyway, so this was the beginning of vegetable oil consumption. 1880, we got refined white wheat flour because of roller mill technology, which could remove the bran and the germ from wheat and give us a refined white wheat flour. Well, refined white wheat flour is a nutrient deficient food. And today, wheat is 20% of the world's diet. In the United States, 85.3% of that is refined, meaning it's nutrient deficient. So it's kind of like sugar in that regard. We're not getting nutrients out of it. And then in 1911, Procter & Gamble introduced trans fats with their product Crisco. And so Crisco is basically partially hydrogenated and hydrogenated vegetable oil. So it also comes from vegetable oil. But if you put those 4 foods together, you have processed food. So when people say, when people, begin to vilify saturated fat, for example, which really started at about in 1961, and or fat in general, which was in the 60s and 70s, and or they point the finger at the U.S. dietary guidelines, which told us to go low fat in 1980. I'm going to go back here. If you go back and look at all of the history in a nutshell, what you see is that we had all the processed foods in place by 1911. Sugar, refined wheat flour, vegetable oils, and trans fats. And what happened is that Big Food just took those foods and today took those 4 ingredients and makes 600,000 food items in the US out of those. And as of 2009, our own USDA reports that 63% of the American diet is made up of those four foods: sugar, refined wheat flour, vegetable oils, and trans fats. They know this, Carrie. They report it. I use their slide in almost every one of my talks to show our own USDA recognizes that this is a massive problem. And somebody there at the USDA knows that that's what's driving all of this. I mean, or they know that's connected to a lot of this chronic disease. So that, in a nutshell, is our problem.
So let's look at each one of them separately. Let's start with the polyunsaturated fatty acids, the vegetable oils. How are the vegetable oils made, and why are they so bad? And is it the dose? The toxin is the dose? How much of this is the average American eating? Unsuspectedly, I might say.
Right, exactly. So, okay, so vegetable oils go through a very complex process to be produced. So they're, first of all, so vegetable oils don't come from vegetables. They come from seeds primarily, seeds and beans, essentially. And the vegetable oils, let me define these. So these are really soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, and rice bran. Those are primarily the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils that go through this really intensive mechanical and chemical process. So the seeds, for example, they're crushed, they're pressed, and then they're heated. Then they go through chemical processes of being alkalinized, bleached, and deodorized, all chemically, with approximately 4 to 5 different heatings, and before they come out, and you have this nice kind of light yellow looking pretty oil that the American Heart Association and Harvard tells us is healthy. But in fact, these oils are extraordinarily oxidized by the time they end up in the bottle. Oxidized means that they're rancid and that they are in fact dangerous right by the time they hit the bottle. And they are also loaded with toxic aldehydes, and we can go into that as well. But so let me give you some numbers that I have worked up recently. So if you look at, a lot of people talk about omega-6 versus omega-3 ratio, for example. And so the seed oils are the major source of omega-6 fats in the diet today. But so we need a tiny amount of these. So omega-6 is essentially linoleic acid. That's the primary 18 carbon omega-6 fatty acid that is an essential fatty acid. We just need 2 essential fatty acids, omega-6 linoleic acid and omega-3 alpha linolenic acid. Those are LA and ALA respectively. All right, so we need tiny amounts of these, and our bodies use these as structural and as signaling molecules, and they are very important, and we need them in very, very tiny doses. So let me tell you that so I went back recently and analyzed the American diet and what we would have been getting in 1865 before we had any seed oils, and what essentially the whole world would have had for the most part would have been, we would have gotten our omega-6 primarily from pasture-raised beef, chicken, pork, and lamb. That's basically it. Those were all raised on pasture, on grass, eating their native traditional diet, and their omega-6 in their body fat is extremely low. It's around 2 to 3%, 3.5% roughly. And so anyway, so I looked at this. I assumed that 1865 Americans were consuming 40% animal fat diet, which is would be pretty typical, because we're about most populations are consuming approximately 40, westernized populations are consuming around 30-some to 40% fat. But anyway, so our omega-6 consumption 1865 would have been 2.2 grams a day. By 1909, because we already had cottonseed oil and soybean oil in the food supply, our omega-6 had already doubled. We were at like 4.8 grams a day. All right, so that's a doubling. By 1999, we were consuming 18 grams of omega-6 a day. That is approximately a 7-fold increase in omega-6. And by 2008, we're at 29 grams of omega-6 linoleic acid alone. That is a roughly, well, it's 11.8-fold increase. So rounded off, a 12-fold increase in our omega-6 consumption over a period of about 145 years, right? 12-fold. This, I believe, is the single most important thing that's ever happened to the world's diet, because, it started in the United States in the 1860s, and, we started sending vegetable oils to Europe, to UK. We adulterated our own olive oil and sent it to Spain and Italy, and then we got soybean oil in 1909, and then you start getting all the other oils because there's so much money in this for big food, and so what happened is that the vegetable oils gradually supplanted and replaced animal fats. So if you look at in 1900, 99% of our added fats in the diet, in the American diet, came from animal fat, was lard, butter, and beef tallow, and we were fantastically healthy. All right. So by 2005, 86% of added fats in the diet came from vegetable oils. So we almost completely have replaced and supplanted animal fats, lard, butter, and beef tallow with vegetable oils. And we have paid a massive price for that, because all of these westernized diseases rise exponentially with that substitution alone. So
now these processed oils, does the body make any oil, or you have to get it from food?
Well, so the thing is you only need, as far as the omega-6, you only need linoleic acid, 18-carbon linoleic acid, and that's the omega-6, and then the omega-3 is alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, and you need those two. From those, you can make all of the other fatty acids that you need. Now, I'm not saying that consuming the longer chain omega-3s like EPA and DHA, icosapentaenoic acid, and docosahexaenoic acid, those that are prominent in fish, for example, yes, those are healthy. But let's face it, here is, the situation is that in the 1900s, very few, very small part of the American population had access to fish on any regular basis, and yet we didn't have heart disease and we didn't have macular degeneration, and cancer rates were exceedingly low. All of this disease, obesity was 1.2% in the 19th century. And so you need those, but those two, the linoleic acid and alpha-linolenic acid, and you need them in incredibly small numbers. So I'll just give you this, for example, in 1909, we were already consuming, this is published data from the NIH, from Tanya Blaswell's work. So in 1909, we consumed 0.76 grams of omega-3 ALA, right? But by 1999, that had elevated to 1.76 grams, I believe it was, or around 1.8 grams. So it approximately, it more than doubled our omega-3 consumption. And I've already talked about what happened with our omega-6, you know, between 1865 and 2008, it went up 12-fold. So in other words, we're not missing omega, we're not needing more omega-3. That's not going to fix our problem. We already are getting, on average, about 2.5 times more omega-3 than we did in 1909. You can't fix this problem with that. You have to get your omega-6 consumption way down. And the only way to do that is to eliminate.
MacuHealth, your science-born and tested solutions for visual performance, macular degeneration, and dry eye syndrome. New products coming soon. Embrace the science.
The seed oils, the vegetable oils.
If you're eating red meat and it's CAFO red meat, what's the difference in the omega-6 amount from CAFO, confined feeding lot red meat, as opposed to cattle that's free range and roaming?
Great question, Kerry, and I can't remember that off the top of my head, but
not exact. I mean, but there's a big difference. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, the thing about the every mammal accumulates omega-6 in their diet. The omega-6 in their diet accumulates in their fat tissue. And so one of the things that has been happening for a long time with CAFO raised beef, for example, is that they're putting beef tallow in their food. Now, CAFO raised beef are consuming GMO corn and soy, just like CAFO raised chickens, CAFO raised pork, all that. You know, they're all eating very similar things. But anyway, the PUFAs, the omega-6 and omega-3, go up in the animals that are CAFO raised substantially. And I can't give you the numbers right offhand, but I can tell you this, that the grass-fed animals, and they've looked at this in all kinds of different animals that are out grazing on grass, like, you know, antelope, deer, and you know, birds, all kinds of animals have been they've looked at their omega-6, and it's all extremely low in their fat. It's around typically around 2 to 3.5% of their body fat. And again, because we accumulate these omega-6s in our body fat. And so if you're consuming CAFO raised beef, you're consuming higher omega-6 even in beef, which is why if you can afford it, you're far better off to go, you know, to get beef that's raised on pasture, out on grass, grazing on grass their entire life, 100% grass-fed beef.
Talk to me about olive oil. Is olive oil healthy, not healthy? A little bit's okay.
Okay, sure, yeah. So first of all, I would say that if it is real, traditional, authentic olive oil, it's pressed, you know, from olives, goes right into the bottle, and, you know, in a good, you know, it's extra virgin. In other words, it's not heated, it's maintained properly, and it's fresh. Olive oil can be absolutely fine. So I don't want to say too much that there's too much bad with olive oil. I'm going to say that I don't think it's nearly as healthy as grass-fed butter, because it's higher in the PUFAs, and we just don't need those. We so desperately need to get the omega-6 in our own body fat down that I think even olive oil is not your best friend, but it's fantastically better, olive oil is, than all of the high PUFA oils, the ones I mentioned, you know, the soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, and rice bran. As you can tell, I've said that 1,000 times.
Yeah.
But anyway, but the problem with here in the United States and even in a lot of Europe, maybe around the world, is that olive oil is not really olive oil. 80% of it is confirmed to be adulterated with these cheap vegetable oils. And here's why. Olive oil is expensive to make. I mean, it is not a cheap oil to make if it's good, authentic olive oil. And so here's what's happening is that these companies they're buying the dirt cheap vegetable oils like soybean or canola, which they can buy for about 74 cents per a kilo. That's 1,000 grams, which turns out to be, it's about 5.6 cents for 80 grams, which is what the average American is consuming per day of vegetable oil. They're paying 5.6 cents for that, I believe the number was, to give you 720 calories worth of food, right? And anyway, so what they're doing is they're adulterating olive oil with this, and 4 out of 5 so-called olive oils in the United States are not true olive oil. And people they think they're getting something healthy, and they're not. So, but if you know that you're getting good quality olive oil, and I would confirm that, I would make dead sure, if you're going to consume that it's authentic, then I think you're okay with that to a degree. I would not recommend cooking with it. I would use it cold, and I think you'll be fine, but I would keep the dose, even of olive oil, small.
The second food that you looked at, or so-called food that we're eating, that Americans consume that increases the risk of chronic disease, such as macular degeneration, is white flour. So when they use it on the roller mill technology, explain the nutrients that it removes and what nutrients we need to replace because of that process, and what percentage of the population of the amount of food that you're eating is from this type of grain.
Right. So, you know, first of all, I think that in perspective, refined wheat flour is a very small part of our problem with macular degeneration. I mean, I would estimate, Carrie, that it's probably in the 5% range or so. But refined wheat flour, again, is, so in 1880, there was the development of roller mill technology, and roller mill technology can shear away the bran and the germ of wheat. Well, the bran and the germ is where the B vitamins, E vitamins, fiber, minerals, omega-3 and omega-6 fats are. So what you're left with a highly refined wheat is the endosperm. And the endosperm is essentially just plain carbohydrate. Now, is this dreadful? Not really. But the problem is that wheat is 20% of the world's diet. So it's 1/5 of the world's diet. And I only have data on this for the United States because it came from Lauren Cordain's group a number of years ago. But anyway, they found that 85.3% of grains are processed, meaning they're nutrient deficient, just like refined wheat flour. And so what's happening is you know, there's 20% of your diet and you're missing B vitamins, E vitamins, so forth. And, you know, when you just start, the more processed food you get, the more you're going to keep adding up on your nutrient deficiencies. And, you know, we have 2 huge issues with food. And it's, number 1 is nutrient deficiency, and number 2 is toxicity, essentially. And when I say toxicity, what I mean is that the vegetable oils, trans fats, and the fructose part of sugar are toxic. And if we look at omega-6 and trans fats and the fructose part of sugar, what we know is that these are pro-inflammatory, pro-oxidative, and directly toxic through the toxic aldehydes. And so those are the really big issues. So in a nutshell, I can go back and tell you this, Carrie. In 1879, the United States consumed twice as much wheat as we do per person as we did 100 years later in 1979. Now, what's the difference? Number one is in 1879, the wheat was all whole grain. So it was a nutrient sufficient food. It had all the nutrients in it because it was whole grain. 1979, it was mostly nutrient deficient. The second thing is that, I think there's very little talk about is that wheat is being sprayed with herbicides and has been since the 1940s in the US and in most of the world. Today, there's something like at least 60 or 70 different herbicides that are being sprayed on wheat. And this is, I think, part of the problem. I can't quantify that, and I'm not sure anybody else can either, but there's certainly issues with that.
Now let's go back to macular degeneration. Talk about how macular degeneration is a marker for systemic health and how it relates to other systemic diseases.
Sure. So, in mainstream conventional allopathic ophthalmology, the connection has already been made between obesity, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease, right? And if you start looking further, you see that really there's a connection between macular degeneration and all of these other chronic diseases. So again, from heart disease to stroke, hypertension, cancer, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity, and the autoimmune diseases like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and all that. And what we know is that if you develop one chronic disease, you're extraordinarily more likely to develop 2 or 3. And right at the moment, I can't remember the exact numbers, but there's an enormous segment of the population today in the U.S. that has one chronic disease, and I wish I could quote those numbers to you, but the fact is all of these run together, and the reason that they all run together is because they're all driven by a common unifying mechanism, and that mechanism is processed food consumption. So I always think of it like I saw a picture a long time ago where you had processed foods at the base, like at the epicenter, and then in this mushroom cloud above it, what you see is all of these diseases of civilization, heart disease, cancer, stroke, hypertension, obesity, all of it runs together. So when conventional allopathic ophthalmology tells us, for example, that obesity is a risk factor for macular degeneration, I tend to think of it like, today I think of it like, I would say obesity is a risk factor for macular degeneration. To me, it's not the risk factor. It simply runs with macular degeneration because they're both driven by the same thing. And so, when an ophthalmologist or optometrist sees a patient in the office and they are overweight or obese, and you say, all right, well, your obesity is causing your macular degeneration, I vehemently disagree with that. I would submit that, and let me back up a step, and then the ophthalmologist or optometrist might say, so what you need to do is you need to lose weight in order to decrease your risk, right? Well, the problem is that the patient doesn't know why they're obese in the first place because of all the confusing messages, right? And so how are they going to lose weight? If they knew, then they would have probably done it, because it's not just eat less, move more. That doesn't work. That doesn't work in anybody. And but they're driven by the exact same thing, and they're driven by a processed food laden diet. And so this is what we ophthalmologists and optometrists need to collectively begin to realize and start understanding what the functional medicine practitioners have known for probably, to a degree, I mean, decades. If you go back to Weston Price's research, if we would have looked at that, we would have known this in 1939. But orthodox, allopathic, conventional medicine pays no attention to this and has virtually no interest in preventing disease.
So many times we'll look into somebody's eye, and now there's new research coming. If we see peripheral drusen or OCT technology, it says, you see this pattern on the optic nerve, or you see peripheral drusen, you're at risk for Alzheimer's disease. But really, it's all running together based on the diet that we're eating.
That's exactly right. It all runs together.
Before we go through the solutions, which we kind of know the cause, so we kind of know the solution, but talk to us about some of the other countries when they started to get macular degeneration, how this adds credence to the theory that you've come up with. It seems it's no longer a theory. It's pretty close to being fact, in my opinion.
Right. Well, and this is what I'll report here is our published data. So we have a paper in the journal Medical Hypotheses, November of 2017, and from our group. And what I'll tell you here is in our paper, and there's a whole lot more there, of course, and I've got a whole lot more in our book. There wasn't room in the paper to publish all the data that we have, because we have data on 25 nations. But let me give you an example. So let me start with this, because I think this is extraordinarily compelling. So conventional ophthalmology and optometry tells us today that 46 to 71% of macular degeneration is driven by genetics. That comes from a paper that came out of Bascom Palmer in 2016. Already at that point, there was 52 gene variants that were related to macular degeneration. And so if up to 71% of this disease is driven by genetics, and then the rest, much of the rest of it is aging, how much is driven, according to, again, conventional ophthalmology, how much of this disease is thought to be aging and genetics? I'm going to say it must be in the 75 to 85% range, maybe. I don't know, but a massive part of it, right? Okay, so let's take the example of the West Africans, okay? There's 3 populations of West Africans, and we have studies that show the prevalence of their macular degeneration in recent years. So Africans of southwestern rural Nigeria. There was a study, and I believe this came out in the early 2000s. And what it showed was that the prevalence of macular degeneration in these people over about age 41 was 0.1%. Now this is a small study, but it's published and it's very relevant. Now 0.1%. Now what do we know about the people in southwestern rural Nigeria is other research showed that they can't get processed food. All right, they didn't have access to grocery stores, restaurants, nothing like that. They're consuming a native traditional diet. They're living off of the land, right? Okay, 240 miles away, there's a population in Onitsha, Nigeria. They studied macular degeneration in these also Western African people, and the prevalence of macular degeneration there was 3.2%. So it's 32-fold higher in this population that was 50 and older. All right. So how do we explain in two populations of West Africans, one in Onitsha, Nigeria, has a macular degeneration prevalence that's 32-fold higher. How do we explain that? Well, in Onitsha, Nigeria, that's a metropolitan population of 1.1 million people. They have grocery stores, they have restaurants, they have processed food, they're getting seed oil, sugar, all that. Not nearly to the degree that most of the world is, which is why their macular degeneration prevalence is relatively low, even there. All right, now, if you jump across the Atlantic down to Barbados, the people of Barbados are about 97% African. And they're African because they're brought there, their ancestors were brought there as slaves. So there was a study done in 1990, I think it came out in 1992, that looked at the African people of Barbados, and for people 40 to 83 years of age, their macular degeneration prevalence was 24.3%, 243 times greater than the Africans of southwestern rural Nigeria. Why would this be? People of Barbados, nutrition researchers around the world know that Barbados is a, quote, mecca for processed food consumption. And they have a, quote, this is what researchers say, a, quote, world profile of metabolic disease, end quote. And that means they have heart disease, cancers, metabolic syndrome, obesity, all of that, right? Naturally they would, because the problem is that the people of Barbados started importing all of their food, and imported food is processed food. I mean, people are not importing cows and chickens. They're importing junk, junk food, most, boxed, canned, packaged food, those kind of, potato chips, hot dogs, you name it, right? Anyway, so what we see is we see a difference of, these are all three West African populations, and a difference of 243-fold in their macular degeneration prevalence, and you can explain all of it by the difference in their food consumption. All right, we can take Japan, for example. From 1974 to 1979, there was a study that showed that macular degeneration prevalence in Japan was 0.2%. All right, so fast forward 30 years to 2007, their macular degeneration prevalence at the lowest level was 11.4%. That is a 57-fold increase in the prevalence of macular degeneration in 30 years. So what do we know about their diet? In a nutshell, they westernized it. For example, their sugar consumption didn't go up that much. I think it went up about 1.5-fold over that period of time. But their vegetable oil consumption in 1961 was 9 grams a day per person. And by 2007, I believe it was 39 grams a day. So their vegetable oil consumption went up 4.5-fold in that period. So that is a huge increase in vegetable oil. And what they did, again, they substituted vegetable oil for other foods, like possibly rice, possibly, other meats and so forth. I'll give you one more example. So New Zealand in 1969, their macular degeneration prevalence was 1.3% for people over the age of 50. By 2014, people aged 45 to 85, their macular degeneration prevalence was 10.3%. So it went up 8-fold, right? In a period of about, whatever that is, 40 years, roughly. 45 years. So, but their vegetable oil consumption in 1960 was about 0 to 1 gram a day and was about 20 grams a day, but from 1991 forward. So they increased their vegetable oil consumption roughly 20-fold. And again, and some of these numbers for vegetable oil are underreported because not all the vegetable oil manufacturers are submitting their data to the data banks that would monitor the total consumption. So if anything, our data numbers are undervalued.
We hear about low fat, low carb, high carb, et cetera, all these different types of diets. What is a primitive diet, and what type of diet kept these people healthy? What did they eat?
Well, Kerry, when you say these people, I mean, are you talking about any population or what population?
Any population before, primitive populations, the ancestral diets before people got chronic disease such as macular degeneration. What were they eating to stay healthy?
You know, so the diets of populations around the world are just drastically different, and we could talk about, you know, the different populations and what they're consuming. You know, I mean, like, you know, early Americans, you know, mid 19th century Americans, we consumed lots of beef, chicken, pork, and mutton, you know, lamb, and the usual thing, you know, plenty of grains, dairy, eggs, dairy, butter. All of those were staples in the American diet. Again, we didn't have any of those 4 processed food groups. You know, there were sugars, refined wheat flour, vegetable oils, and trans fats. You could say a very, very similar thing about the British, for example. Their diet, I think, was quite similar to ours in that regard. But if you look at, here's a really interesting one, the Maasai tribe of Kenya and Tanzania, they were studied, they've been studied by several groups, but I like the research from George Mann's group that was published in 1972. And the Maasai tribe, so they're pastoralists. They raise cattle, and they live off of almost exclusively milk, meat, and blood. And most of that is milk. And they don't sacrifice their animals very often. So they don't eat a whole lot of animal meat from their own cattle. They'll kill animals and eat other animals, but they don't kill their own cattle very often. But anyway, they consume the average Maasai warrior would consume 3 to 5 quarts of whole raw milk per day. And that is a very high saturated fat milk from these animals. It's upwards of 68% saturated. So Maasai warriors were getting, this is all published, they're getting 66% of their diet was animal fat. At least 33 and up to 45% of that, probably closer to 45% of it, is saturated animal fat, right? Their diet was like 17% carbohydrate because they got almost no fruits or vegetables ever. In fact, the Moran part of the Maasai, which is the warriors aged 14 to about 30 to 35, in that period, they're not allowed to consume anything other than milk, meat, and blood. Nothing else. And so, but yet, in 1972, George Mann's group, they did autopsies on 50 people, no heart disease, no heart attacks. They did 350 EKGs of the Maasai and found 1 possible silent MI, silent heart attack, in the entire group. So what they found was that they're essentially have no cardiovascular disease. And if you look at these guys, they're extraordinarily lean, just chiseled, ripped, brilliantly healthy people. They had no obesity, no diabetes, virtually no cancer. You know, you can't find a healthier population anywhere on the planet. Do you want me to give you other examples, Kerry? I could go on. I can talk about more if you want.
If we could just talk about what should somebody do? What should they eat to try to prevent them from getting chronic disease? and macular degeneration? What are some of the simple things that they can do?
Yeah.
Based on all the research that you've done and what you've learned, and so we kind of know that all these, the ancestral diets, they're all kind of a little bit different. They are all high in macro and micronutrients. They're not eating processed food. But the person sitting home, what can they do? They think, well, they wouldn't sell it in the supermarket if it was bad for me. So what can they do? What can we do? What should we do?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So first of all, you can make an ancestral diet. And this is what I follow is I say that, I'm just eating an ancestral diet is what I'd call it. I wouldn't call it, I don't call it paleo. I'm not keto. I'm not low carb. I'm not low fat. You can make your diet any kind of food you want. You can eat American, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Bolivian, you can eat like a Maasai warrior. So here's the thing, you can make any kind of food you want, but if you're going to eat healthy, I will submit to you that it is not easy in this day and age. You have to, I believe, you need to prepare almost all of your own food. And if you eat out, you've got to be extraordinarily careful because you need to eliminate those 4 things: sugar, refined wheat, vegetable oils, and trans fat. And if you eat any processed man-made food, if it comes ready-made, you are almost guaranteed to be eating those things and eating significant amounts. Almost nobody is pouring vegetable oil into their food. Now, people do who cook at home and they're pouring the wrong oil in there, but most people don't even need to ever own a bottle of vegetable oil, and yet they're consuming 80 grams of vegetable oil a day because it's already in the prepared food. Because prepared food is made with sugar and vegetable oils. Those are the primary, and wheat. Those are the primary components right there. So you need to start by making your own food. You want tacos, you want, a fish dinner, you want hamburgers, make it with, make it yourself and make it with ancestral ingredients. Start with that. And if you, what I think is the easiest thing to do, people get so caught up in, what are the healthy oils? Quite frankly, I think the simplest, one of the healthiest things you can possibly do is eliminate all oils from your diet. Just in order to keep it simple, no oils, use butter for all of your cooking and get a good pastured butter. This is a grass-fed butter, and they're in most grocery stores. I don't even need to name names, just look for pastured butter. These are, the cattle are raised on grass and they make the butter from those, and that will give you a fantastically healthy source of fat to cook in. And we cook in almost everything in butter. So if you have to eat out, you have to be extraordinarily vigilant to find foods that do not contain these ingredients. And I have a friend, and I started doing this. She read my book, we became friends, and what she tells, when she goes into a restaurant, she says, look, I have an allergy to vegetable oils. So if you, and then the waiter, waitress, they'll go to the back and make sure, because they don't want somebody to have an allergic reaction in their restaurant, right? It would just be devastating to them. So they make sure that they're not getting, if it's going to be cooked in any kind of oil, they're going to eliminate that, or they're going to cook it in butter, or they're not going to use any oil at all. But I think that is a great thing to do. You just say, I'm allergic to it. And might as well be, because these oils are poisons. So call it an allergy, but you've got to get those out of your diet. That's a key step.
So we want to eat real food, kind of like our great grandmother ate. Everything's
Right.
one ingredient, organic, and it doesn't really matter if we're eating meat as long as it's grass fed, or fish. As long as it's not farm raised and it's wild and it's small fish, and we're eating it from head to tail. So we're eating the entire animal. You talk about head to tail eating that's really important. You can make a quick mention of that.
Yes. So if you looked at Weston Price's research in a nutshell, which is just extraordinary, I think, you know, everybody on the planet ought to read his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, published in 1939 and 1945. One of the things, a massive understanding you'll walk away from that book with, and it'll change your life. If you haven't read it, read it. It's 500 pages. You know, you'll understand almost everything you need to know about nutrition. You won't understand the toxicity of today's food, but you're going to understand what to do. And but the take-home point here is that what Price found was that native traditional diets on 5 continents had 10 times more fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K2 than Americans' diets in the 1930s. 10 times more A, D, and K2, and we are so incredibly deficient in those vitamins. And they contained, the native traditional diets Price found contained 4 times more water-soluble vitamins, which is all the B vitamins and C, than American diets in the 1930s, and 1.5 to 60 times more minerals. So that right there, as I said, the 2 big issues is nutrient deficiency and toxicity from processed foods. So you want to get nutrient-dense food. And how do you do that? You get it from the foods that have been vilified in the last 60, 70 years. And those foods are meat, animal meats, eggs, butter, all raised in the right way. You know, meats, eggs, butter, raw milk. I wouldn't say pasteurized milk. I would call that a processed food that's not probably worth consuming. But raw milk, those things right there will give you all those vitamins. And organ meats. So as Carrie's saying, we need to eat head to tail from these animals. So organ meats are extraordinarily nutrient dense. So liver, heart, kidneys, pancreas, all those kind of things, that's where the nutrients are. They're in the organs. So one of the healthiest things that everybody should do, in my opinion, is eat liver. I would say every other week for sure, eat a few ounces of liver. It's one of the healthiest things you could possibly do because you're getting all the vitamin A, D, K2, you're getting minerals, all in a few ounces of incredibly nutritious food. For example, beef liver could give you around 52,000 international units of vitamin A in 3 ounces. Compare that to 40 international units of vitamin A in a boneless, skinless chicken breast. 40 versus 50,000. You know, the comparison is just, you know, dramatically different.
You mentioned this before, just a quick mention again about saturated fat. We're told that saturated fat is going to kill us and give us heart attacks. Just review some of that for a minute.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I think what makes the most sense is when people start arguing about, here's what's happened is people went down the path essentially of this, and researchers, that we were misled by one simple, severe misconception. And it was that there was a belief system that cholesterol causes heart disease and saturated fat elevates cholesterol. And therefore, saturated fat causes heart disease, right? The whole thing has been proven over and over again to be false. I mean, there's no validity to this argument whatsoever. There are so many studies that have discounted entirely that entire argument. In fact, today there is extraordinary evidence that there is virtually no relationship, almost no relationship whatsoever between cholesterol and heart disease. For example, native cholesterol in LDL, for example. So no relation between LDL and established heart disease as evidenced by the gold standard of scanning, which is coronary artery calcium scanning, right? So 20 studies, this was published just recently, or in the last 11 years, that there's no relationship between heart disease and LDL cholesterol at all. In fact, just the opposite was shown. For example, Uffe Ravskov's group published just in 2015, I think it was, on around 19 different studies that looked at this intensively. And what they found was that people that have the highest cholesterol live the longest, not the shortest. If you're over age 60, the higher your cholesterol, the longer you live. You have less heart disease, less stroke, less cancers, less dementia, less Alzheimer's, all of those things. All right. So, now let's look at a couple of populations, for example. So again, I mentioned the Maasai warriors already. 33 to 45% of their diet, saturated animal fat. That's the highest amount of saturated animal fat of any population known on the planet. And they don't have any heart disease. They have virtually none, right? One possible case of a silent MI in their entire studied population. Let's talk about the inhabitants of Tokelau, the South Pacific island of Tokelau. The Tokelauans were studied in the 1960s and 70s, and their diet is around, I forget the exact numbers, but around 60% comes from coconut. So most of that is coconut oil. Well, coconut oil is 91 to 94.5% saturated. So the Tokelauans' diet was 48% saturated fat. Virtually half of their diet is saturated fat. So while the Maasai warriors, the Maasai tribe of Kenya and Tanzania, get the honors for consuming the most saturated animal fat in the world and have no heart disease, the Tokelauans consume the most saturated fat, which comes from a tropical oil, coconut, and guess what? They had zero heart disease. And in fact, they had zero chronic disease. They had virtually, there was no obesity, no diabetes, virtually no cancer in their entire studied population. Extraordinarily healthy people. So what were they eating? They were eating mostly coconut, small amount of fish, and some fruits and vegetables, and that was basically about it. Very simple diet. They did. I think they did have very small amounts of pork and chicken, but I think that was really small.
For us, which is better, grass-fed butter to cook with or organic coconut oil?
Well, I think grass-fed butter, personally, they're both good. They're both really, really good. Coconut oil is really, really healthy to cook with because of the fact, again, it's 91 to 94.5% saturated. Saturated fats won't oxidize. They won't undergo peroxidation, which is what the polyunsaturated fats will do. So with coconut oil, you're absolutely going to be in really super good shape if you're cooking with coconut oil. But the one thing that coconut oil won't give you that butter, grass-fed butter will, is vitamins A, D, and K2. And so that's the thing. There isn't an oil on the planet that comes from vegetables that has vitamins A, D, and K2. You're not going to get those. Butter, you will. You'll get them.
I got to ask you this, that people always ask me, they say back in 1800s, people didn't get these chronic diseases because they didn't live long enough. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, another fantastic and major misconception. So here's what people do, and this drives me bananas, is that, so they look back at the average life expectancy. I wish I had those notes here. I may carry, but
give me an approximation.
Yeah, so the average life expectancy in the U.S. in 1900 was like 49.8 years, I think it was. So in the United States. And so they go, well, nobody lived past 50. Therefore, they didn't get heart disease and cancer and all these diseases, right? They didn't get, that's why they didn't get macular degeneration. Well, that is a complete and utter fallacy, because let me give you a hypothetical situation. So if a man lives to be 80 and his only son dies at 6 months of age, the average life expectancy of the two is 40 years, right? Okay, now let's take a family of 3. A man lives to be 80, his wife lives to be 70, and their child dies at 6 months of age. The total years lived for the 3 is 150 divided by 3. Now the average life expectancy is 50. So that's called life expectancy at birth, and that's 50 years. Well, this is the scenario for 19th century Americans. Here's why. In 1800, in all the world, 43.3% of children did not live to see their 5th birthday. Almost half of the world's children, 43.3%. In 1900, it wasn't much better. 36.2% of the world's children did not live to see their 5th birthday. And in 1900, in the United States, 4% of women died in childbirth. The risk of death in childbirth in the year 1900 was 1 to 1.5% per birth. And so there was average of around 3 to 4 births. So the average, so on average, 4% of women died in childbirth, which is, again, was typically before age 30 or 35, right? So right there, you've got 40% of the population, roughly 30 to 40% of the population dead at a very early age. So childhood is was extremely dangerous, term to get through because of infectious diseases primarily. So children could easily die of, typhoid, gastrointestinal infections, and so forth. Even, cholera, severe diarrheal diseases could kill children because they never could make it to a doctor or to a hospital, just get IV fluids, for example, and there were no antibiotics. So, so right there, what we know is that, people lived into old age. In fact, as an example, the first 9 U.S. presidents lived to an average age of 79 I take it back. I've got the data here. The first 8 U.S. presidents lived to an average of 79.4 years, right? The average age of death for a man today in the U.S. is 76. And the last of those first 8 U.S. presidents to die was in 1862. That was Martin Van Buren. Now, the last 12 presidents to die that have all died since 1923, their average age at death was 75.5 years. They all died of chronic disease, every single one of them. They died of stroke, heart attack, cancer, congestive heart failure, and Alzheimer's. That's the last 12 presidents. And I excluded JFK because he was assassinated, and that would have dropped the average lifespan way down. So now let me tell you this.
What the first 8 presidents die of?
I'm sorry?
The first 8 presidents that you talked about, what?
Oh yeah, they virtually all died of infectious disease. Virtually, I think one of them had a stroke, if I remember right. I'm not sure if I have that. Yeah, I don't have that handy, but they,
in general, they died of infectious disease rather than chronic disease.
Right. So yeah, but in a nutshell, the first 8 U.S. presidents lived 3.9 years longer than our last 12 to die. Right? If you looked at in the United Kingdom, I'll give you an example. In the United Kingdom, in 1891, at age 70, 43% of the population at age 70 was still alive. 43%. And in 1911, 51% of the population in England was still alive at age 70, right? It's just because, I mean, the kids are dying and the women in childbirth, that's what was happening. And so today, what we have is a situation where people are living longer, but the last 10 or 15 years or 20 years of their lives are just absolutely miserable. We have people in nursing homes for the last 10 or 15 years of their lives, a lot of them, because of chronic disease. So, I gave one example with macular degeneration in the year, in 1920, there was, I think, I don't have that data handy, but in 1920, I think it was 4.1 million people were over the age of 65 in the United States. And so if macular degeneration prevalence was the same in 1920 as it was in 1990, then there should have been over 1.1 million people with macular degeneration in the year 1920. And we know that there was no more than 50 cases of macular degeneration in all the world's literature between 1851 and 1930, right? So, I mean, the literature would have just been covered with macular degeneration cases in 1920, because, I mean, ophthalmologists were dilating the eyes. They were using ophthalmoscopes in 1860s. They were dilating the eyes with 5 or 6 different dilating agents by the 1880s, and they gave extraordinary accounts of what they would see in the macula, in the retina, in the late 19th century, let alone the early 20th century. There was 200 different models of ophthalmoscope available by 1913 around the world. 200 different brands and versions in use around the world, and yet no more than 50 cases of macular degeneration in all the world's literature at that point.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Chris Knobbe. He's a wealth of knowledge for joining us today. Chris, if people want to find out more about you and about your organization, how can they do that?
Yeah, so the organization is called Cure AMD Foundation, and we're at Cure, CUREAMD.org, cureamd.org. We give away all the information now. I do have a book available that is, you can get to it from there, or you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I earn nothing from this organization. I am interested in helping people and preventing vision loss. 340 people at least will go blind from macular degeneration today, and everything I know, every last morsel that of evidence and knowledge I've learned in the last 9 years about this tells me that every single case of vision loss in that due to macular degeneration is preventable. And that's why I am here today with Dr. Carrie Gelb, because I want to be a part of this movement that stops that and helps people get healthier by understanding ancestral diets and what they can do for you. And they are amazing. I'm living proof. I feel fantastic today, and I can do things today that I couldn't do 9 years ago when I was 50 because of an ancestral diet. I want all of your audience to hear this message, Carrie, and I want to change their lives because it's just fun and it's just amazing.
Well, I want to work with you together with our film, Open Your Eyes, to help prevent this terrible disease. Signing off, this is Dr. Carrie Gelb for Open Your Eyes. Thank you for joining us.
Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
Fitting multifocal contact lenses presents a big opportunity to meet patient needs while growing your practice. Alcon is your partner not only with our innovative portfolio, but through e-learning. Learn to enhance your multifocal strategy today with the Alcon Experience Academy.
OIE Broadcasting is the emerging leader in social media. We use scientific entertainment to drive more patients into your office. Visit oiebroadcasting.com and sign up today.